Welcome to the podcast, "'Tis But a Scratch, Fact and Fiction About the Middle Ages." I'm your host, Professor Richard Abels, and today's episode is on a unique and very strange Arabic book. The book containing a selection concerning the exposure of secrets, which its translator Humphrey Davies gives the more evocative title, The Book of Charlatans. This is a work by an obscure early 13th-century Arabic scholar, Jamal al-Din al-Rahim ibn Umar ibn Abi Bakr al-Damashqi al-Jabari, fortunately commonly known as al-Jabari. Frankly, I never heard of this book until I was approached by my co-host for this episode, Peter Konieczny, to do an episode on it, and I'm really glad that he did. The Book of Charlatans is a comprehensive guide to the scams, con games, and various deceits for profit and by fake prophets practiced in the Islamic East in the early and high Middle Ages. Reading it, I thought to myself, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Before we begin, I have a small favor to ask. This is the 48th episode of "'Tis But a Scratch, and though I have no intention of monetizing the podcast, I would like to reach as many fans of the Middle Ages as I can. I've been told that a good way to do this is through ratings and reviews. If you are enjoying "'Tis But a Scratch, and if the podcast service you use allows for ratings and reviews, please consider giving it a high rating and a good review. And if you have any questions about any of the episodes or just want to chat about the Middle Ages, feel free to contact me at my email, all lowercase, richard.abels, that's ABELS, 54 at gmail.com. Okay, now that we got that business done, on to the show. As I said, my co-host for this episode is Peter Konieczny, co-founder with Sandra Alvarez and owner of medievalist.net, an online website that offers, quote, readers news, articles, videos, online classes, and podcasts about the medieval world and how that history is presented today, end quote. You might remember Peter from the episode we did on the Mongols' destruction of Baghdad. If you haven't listened to that episode, I urge that you give it a try. It's one of the podcast's most popular episodes. So without further ado, welcome back, Peter.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, great to be back, and looking forward to chatting to you about this book.
Yeah. You know, as I said, I never even heard of the Book of Charlatans until you mentioned it to me. So can you tell the listeners how you became aware of this work and why you think it is a good subject for a podcast?
Oh, so I came across this book because it's part of a series from New York University Press called the Library of Arabic series. The idea is that, hey, let's put out these Arabic translations of medieval Arabic works, even some more modern stuff, to get, a wider audience to it. And this is like a perfect example of what they're trying to do. Come up with this version translated by Humphrey Davies. So he's a kind of a big name in that kind of a Arabic literature world. So.
And it's edited by Manuela Dengler. And I was thinking that the translation is by Humphrey Davies, but I think that he was consulting Dengler for some of the technical stuff in this.
I imagine. I think it's a bit of a very much of a team project, this Library of Arabic series. And so I came across it through them because, I've been kind of getting their works for the last few years, and I was just stunned when I read it. This idea that, there's a book about scams and it's written so well, so I gave a paper at the International Congress of Medieval Studies, Kalamazoo, about the part about warfare, how he describes warfare. But I'm like, wow, I really got to do this because I've always kind of been interested in crime, right? In the violence. If I'm not studying medieval warfare, I'm usually studying criminals from the Middle Ages.
Yes.
And this just is a huge eye opener.
It is. It appears almost like an encyclopedia of scams. So who was al-Jabari and how did he come to write the Book of Charlatans? The little that we know about the life of al-Jabari is summarized by Humphreys and Dengler in the introduction to the translation, and virtually everything they have to say comes from al-Jabari's references to himself in the Book of Charlatans, which is his one surviving work.
And when we say that we don't know very much about him, like other works, there's only like a couple others that reference him, right? And
Humphreys and Dengler could find only one pre-modern reference to al-Jabari. That comes in a massive bibliographic biographical dictionary compiled by the Ottoman polymath Haji Khalifa in 1652. In that work, al-Jabari gets 2 brief entries.
And my hunch is like they only kind of read this book too, and they're working from that because
that's where we get any information of his biography is from his own writing. Well, we know that because he tells us he wrote 2 other books that are lost. One of them that was on astrology, and the other one on geomancy, which I have to admit I had never heard of before. I had to look it up, and I found myself reading the Wikipedia article and wishing that there was a Wikipedia article to explain the Wikipedia article, because it looks like higher mathematics. It's a system of divination based upon the generation of random numbers.
Oh.
And then applying that random number series to astrology in order to divine and answer questions about, future events.
A true science.
It's scientific, but we don't have that work, and we don't have the work on astrology. All we have is the Book of Charlatans. Okay, so what do we actually know about this guy? As his name implies, he was born in Jamal, which is now in Syria, but he traveled extensively throughout the Islamic Empire, going as far east as India. And everywhere he went, he seems to have associated with conmen, tricksters, and criminals, almost as if he was doing research for this book. That's unlikely, as all the dated incidents in the book are prior to its commissioning, which was sometimes between 1222 and 1232. Given that al-Jabari describes a number of the tricksters as friends or acquaintances, one actually wonders whether he himself was at one time a practitioner. But if he had been, he had long since gone straight, if academic study can be considered straight. Al-Jabari introduces himself in the first line of the book as an erudite sheikh, and then justifies the claim by telling the reader that he studied the books of sages and scholars, looking into all the scientific fields, and read all that he could about the various arts and sciences, both natural and occult. He then name drops most prominent of those authors, beginning with the 10 books attributed to a legendary figure, Asif ibn Bakiyah, who supposedly used magic to bring the Queen of Sheba's throne to Solomon in the twinkling of an eye. He cites also Hermes Trismegistus, another legendary figure, the supposed author of several Hellenistic works on astrology, philosophy, and magic, and then 16 ancient Arabic and Greek sages, including Plato and Aristotle, and a dozen modern Arabic scholars, and concludes with the statement, "In the end, I got up to about 300 books."
The funny thing, like, there's always he says all this little parts about, hey, what I read. He also tells you, there's a whole bunch of other stuff, but I don't want to bore you, and you get a lot of that, right?
Yeah.
I'm the greatest scholar in the world, and I'll give you these details, but I don't want to give you everything.
What al-Jabari doesn't cite are Arabic literary works. As Humphrey Davies points out, the Book of Charlatans has only a few references to, and even fewer quotations from Arabic poets, which, along with the author's writing style, led him to conclude that, quote, he was not a product of the classical literary and religious curriculum typically followed by the educated of his day, end quote. Davies explains that the Book of Charlatans is written in a quirky and uneven voice that alternates between formality and informality. The sometimes lengthy anecdotes drawn from al-Bajari's personal experiences, which he uses to illustrate the scams, are written in an informal style that includes man in the street vernacular dialogue. It's about as far as one can get from the flowery prose that characterizes other elite scholarly works of this period. But that doesn't necessarily mean that al-Jabari was himself a fraud when he called himself an erudite sheikh. The straightforward and sometimes casual prose of the Book of Charlatans may have more to do with the wishes of al-Jabari's patron who commissioned it than with the author's educational background. Now, according to al-Jabari, the origins of the book was that in the 1220s he was a scholar in residence at the court of Rukn al-Din Muad'Dib, the last ruler of the Turkman Ottoman dynasty in a region that stretched over southeastern Turkey. Now, following a discussion in court about an 11th century work entitled Deceit Disrobed and Doubts Dispelled by a scholar who I never heard of, Ibn Shahid, the Sultan commissioned al-Jabari to write a similar work, but he gave him as his marching orders, make it shorter, and that means that that original work had been pretty long, and make it more understandable, which may be the reason why the style is what it is. It may not be that Jabari couldn't have written in the high elite style, but he was being told, make this something I can understand. And that's exactly what he did. So, Peter, why don't you tell us a little bit about what he actually wrote?
And so what's in it? And like, there's about 30 chapters, and he's saying, like, here are the scams or deceits that these various groups pull off. And like, he goes through them, like, physicians, apothecaries, Christians, monks, sheikhs, like Islamic preachers of all of that. Jewish people get a small
Jewish people. The second shortest chapter for the Jewish people, but the one that has the most malicious introduction. He writes about the Jews, the most hateful and malignant of all creation, the most tenacious in its misbelief, most intolerable as an affliction, most vicious in their behavior and outward appearance. Though the only tricks he says about the Jews is that they use out knockout drugs to rob and kill Muslim travelers, and they sell fake versions of the apothecaries' products to unsuspecting Muslims. Knockoff drugs.
It's an interesting little bit. It almost kind of thinks like, he doesn't really deal with the Jewish people very much, but he seems to deal with Christians all the time.
Yeah, and he's not really as outraged by the Christians. And he doesn't seem to be all that outraged by most of the scams, except for those that are religious scams.
Indeed. So, like, what he's trying to show, and as he tells you, wise up to these things.
Yeah, I love that. There's 279 sections in these 30 chapters, and at least half of them conclude with, you better wise up to this.
And he's trying to say, like, oh, here's how so-and-so, played this, con. And he tells they did this, and he explains how it was done, right?
Yeah.
And so many of them are elaborate. Some are just crazy.
Elaborate. The treasure seekers, I was man, the preparation that goes into that scam is just stunning. And I could see it could be pulled off.
Yeah.
But I think that what he says in that section is that the reason why it works, and this is such a timeless thing that he says, and the reason everyone falls for them and listens to what they say, and I'm quoting now, and follows their instructions, is that they're driven by that greed for money that plays havoc with men's minds and is obeyed by potentates, plutocrats, and paupers alike, all of whom become slaves to its influence. It's your greed that makes you susceptible to all of these scams.
Mm-hmm. Like, he kind of pretends to write this as this, like, oh, watch out for these things. And, but the way he puts the details in it, like it's almost aimed for the people, like a person that like loves true crime, right?
Yes. Yes.
Like or how we all like watch the TV news and they start off with all these crimes and stuff like that, no matter late night news, or that's how it used to be. So, and you hear all the details and the idea, like when they say, oh, we want to make sure the public knows and is on guard against this, right? But no, you just want the salacious details, right?
Yes.
And that's like I think that's really what he's going for, and yeah, so the idea, is all right, this group does this, here's how they do it. And you from what you can tell is like, it seems like he has quite the insider knowledge, because he tells us a lot of times, in several occasions, like, I was there, or
yes.
this is how I learned it, and he uncovers some people's tricks, himself, and then they give him money, and like he uncovers one guy's tricks, and the guy puts him up in the house for a while, so he doesn't say anything, so and he gets a part of the money, so he's doing well,
Reading this made me think of James Randi, the amazing Randi. He was a stage magician who became famous when he debunked Uri Geller's claim to possess paranormal powers. And then he had a second career exposing other charlatans, fake psychics, fake faith healers, by explaining how they pulled off their tricks. It's that same sort of sense in this, that you're looking behind the curtain. This is the backstage tour of the magician's tricks that we're reading about. I kind of wondered about how accurate all of this was. The only one that I really was familiar with, just because I've actually done this, is that he talks about how you use invisible ink and you surprise your audience by showing how all of a sudden this blank piece of paper has writing on it, and you're using onion juice or vinegar, and it works. It actually works.
Indeed. Like, so a lot of them are really detailed in the sense, like, hey, you have to have this and this and this, like, ingredients, like, and you and I just don't have, like, mercury sitting around. So there's a lot of elaborate chemistry involved in some of this stuff.
Yeah, there is.
Others take a lot of preparation, right? Like, and so do you want to give one of your favorites, and I'll give you one of my favorites?
Okay. Why don't you start with your favorite, that I'll give you mine.
All right. So we have talks about this sheikh. He goes down into a baking pit after a whole bunch of firewood has put inside. He says he descends, disappears for a while, and comes back holding a pot of stuffed fish or a chicken casserole or some roast mutton or whatever else may be. And he says this fools everyone and leaves them speechless. And he describes there's different ways of doing this trick. So imagine someone going into this kind of a pit that's been modified for baking, so it's on fire and stuff like that. And he says that the first is to have the upper part of the pit fireproofed. This means that the heat of the fire is contained within the upper part of the pit, while the lower part remains cool. This pit must be well constructed and have a metal sheet at the bottom. The sheet has an empty space in it next to the pit wall, so it is precisely and tightly that the fire is kept strictly within the confines of the sheet. And as long as Sheikh keeps his hand on the edge of the pit, the sheet is held steady around the empty space, along with the fire above it, and the bottom of the pit is kept cool and free of fire. The man stays there for as long as he knows it takes the dish in question to be done. On his way back, he picks it up and feeds those in attendance. Following that, he writes about fake sheikhs who descend into burning pits and come out unscathed, and others who snuff out a candle with a finger and then hold up a hand on which all 5 fingers are alight like a candelabra.
He explains that both tricks involve the production of fire-retarding ointments. In the first case, it is smeared all over the charlatan's body. In the second case, it is used to coat his fingers, and after it dries, the fingers are then dipped into oil. Al-Jabari helpfully provides 2 recipes for making this useful fire-retarding ointment. The first seems pretty simple. Take a bunch of frogs, boil them in water until all their flesh falls off. Remove the liquid from the fire and let the fat congeal on the surface of the liquid. Remove the frog fat and mix it together with saltpeter, and voila, you have a protective coating against burns. Frankly, I have my doubts. The other recipe is more complicated. Place talc, hematite, house leek, white jasmine, and fresh cilantro into a mortar and grind them together until the mixture has the consistency of an ointment. Let it dry, then grind it thoroughly again, this time adding frog fat. And that's it. Frog fat seems to be the essential secret ingredient in both recipes. Again, I'm skeptical about whether either would work, but a quick Google search came up with an interesting medical research article about the use of frog skins as a dressing to facilitate the healing of burn wounds. Who knew?
As I read it, I could think in the modern times, this can be done, right? I've seen where, a person goes on fire, right? Stunt actors, right? They have that fire trick, but I can't believe they did it 800 years ago, right?
I know. And they pulled it off. Because this whole thing is that the reason why you better wise up is because these are the things that actually work. But my favorite scam in the Book of Charlatans has to do with a trained ape. Al-Jawbari tells us that while he was in the city of Haran, he met a con artist who had taught an ape to make salams to people, to finger prayer beads while moving its lips as if in prayer, and to weep on command. The scam involved perfuming the ape, dressing him up in lavish clothes to pass him off as an enchanted prince. The ape was mounted on a mule with a saddle decorated in gold, accompanied by 3 Indian slaves dressed in the finest clothes. As he rode to the mosque, the ape performed salams to passerbys. Once arriving at the mosque, a slave boy helped the ape dismount, and another, who carried an ornate prayer carpet and overshoes, led him into the mosque. Again, the ape performed salams while settling down on the prayer mat before the prayer beads. As the ape appeared to be fingering the beads and making his prayers, the slave boy explained to an amazed congregation of worshippers that the ape was actually the son of a great Indian king who was under a magical spell by a jealous wife. That wife now demanded that the prince pay her 100,000 gold pieces to lift that spell. The prince's father and neighboring kings had raised all but 10,000 gold pieces. The boy then cried out, quote, "Who will have mercy on this youth whose princely status, family, and homeland have all been lost to him, and who has been changed from his true form into that of an ape?" End quote. While the boy made his appeal, the ape, with handkerchief to his eyes, appeared to be weeping. Everyone's heart was touched, and the charlatan collected a tidy sum. The gang then moved on to another mosque and pulled the same trick. Al-Jabari assures us that he personally witnessed this scam. Al-Jabari repeatedly admonishes his readers to wise up, but I couldn't help thinking that he had more than a sneaking admiration for some of the more creative charlatans and their scams. In several of his anecdotes, al-Jabari not only tells us that he witnessed scam, but he even asks the con artist to explain how he pulled off the trick. He even identifies a few of them as old friends or acquaintances. What he never does in these anecdotes is expose their chicanery to the gullible marks. At best, he acts like a modern-day objective reporter simply observing and recording. At worst, he is complicit in the cons that he condemns. Of the 30 kinds of charlatans he identifies in the book, he reserves his most fervent denunciations for Jews, duplicitous women, and we'll talk about that a bit later, and false prophets. And false prophets are the only ones in this book who get punished for their scams.
Yeah.
They get caught eventually and are executed.
Yeah, eventually the stories of them getting caught, the stories get people getting caught are very rare here. They're sometimes al-Jabari catches them and they just pay him off.
Yes. Yes.
And he doesn't seem to find this, I did something wrong or anything like that. It's just like, yep, I lived at this guy's house for the next while.
What makes the Book of Charlatans such a good read are the anecdotes al-Jabari relates about how he or a friend witnessed these scams. The explanations of how the charlatans pulled off their tricks can be dry reading, but the anecdotes are vivid and, for a historian, provide valuable insight into the culture of the 13th century Muslim Near East and the mindset of the educated elite, or at least the mindset of the males of this era. This book culminates in a chapter on the deceits of women. It's highly misogynistic, and in order to illustrate a typical deceit, he tells us a secondhand story, a story that was related to him by a good friend of his. So here's how the story goes. This friend had been a member of the Royal Guard, and I think we're told that to show that this is a guy who actually has some substance. He had been a member of the Royal Guard until he quit to open a store in Cairo in which he sold nuts and snacks. Now, one of his best customers was this old woman. Now, al-Jabari's friend was growing kind of lonely. The actual term probably would be horny, because what he really wanted was a young girl, and old women are great procurers. But he didn't want just any ordinary young girl. He wanted a innocent young girl, a naive young girl, as he put it, someone who wasn't a rattled whore, because he said, I don't want to keep on looking over my shoulder and. And the old woman manages to come up with one. She's perfect. She's 15 years old. She's recently married. She's naive, and she is persuadable. And the friend starts a sexual affair with this young girl while her husband is at work in the city. Then one day, her husband comes home early. Al-Jabari's friend is nervous about this. He's going to get caught. But the girl has a solution. She sets up a curtain in the bedroom and tells him to stand behind the curtain. Husband comes upstairs, sees the curtain, figures there's someone behind the curtain, turns to his wife, and his wife said, don't you dare start with me. Behind the curtain is my cousin, and she's been beaten by her husband, and she is so upset. And she came running to me. And of course, the curtain's there for modesty's sake. And she tells her husband, and she's desperately hungry, but we have no food in the house. Go to the market. The husband obediently goes to the market to buy some food for the cousin. Now, al-Jabari's friend figures this is a good time to make his escape, but that would leave this young girl in the lurch. And she makes him swear that he will stay long enough to have food with her husband, but he shouldn't worry about it because she has a trick. And here's how the trick works. Husband comes back to find a man now standing with his wife. Who's this man? This man is the wife-beating husband. He has pursued his wife here. So the young woman turns to her husband and says, you need to talk to him. You need to reconcile the two. You need to explain to him about women and how sometimes women can be disobedient. Take him downstairs, have some food with him, chat with him, talk with him. I will take my cousin back home. And that's exactly what happens. So al-Jabari's friend has lunch with his with the cuckolded husband, and everything works out. But at this point, the friend now is disillusioned. I can't believe it. He's having an affair with this woman, but this disillusions him because he sees how deceitful even a young, once naive woman could be, and it must mean that they get contaminated by other women. So he swears off women until he gets lonely enough that he figures it's time that he gets married, finds another 15-year-old woman who is naive, innocent, and everything goes well. He says, I'm going to live with her to make sure that she remains innocent. And life is good until one day he comes home from work and finds a curtain hanging in his bedroom. So that's a story that al-Jabari tells us that his friend told him. And the conclusion of it is you can't trust women, that they are deceitful, they use their wiles. But if you want to know more, I have a book recommended to you that's written in the 9th century about the wiles of women, because Everett the scholar, al-Jabari, is going to give us a footnote.
It's good stuff. So you come across, man, every other group in the world is a terrible group, so everyone is evil. Like you got that, but because everyone like the physicians and the apothecaries and the people that change money, so
yeah, the money changers are pretty bad. Yeah.
So the one like with Christians is kind of interesting because he goes in like, hey, here are the scams that like are done in churches.
Yeah.
Right? And like he goes to one of the Holy Sepulchre, right? Like we've got the famous, like there's that one, the famous it still happens, the miracle of the holy fire, right? And which like I've seen YouTube videos, it's interesting and stuff like that, but like he, hey, this is a scam. This is how it's done. I can see like people like reading this. Those Christians getting scammed by those priests and stuff like that, right? Like, it's interesting because he says like the first time, like I guess some caliph goes to Jerusalem, right, and like the priest there tells him, well, I can tell you what this scam is, or you can just take the money, the profits from all the pilgrims. And so it's, one can see it like, as a good Muslim boy, al-Jabari is like, man, those Christians just naive fools, so it's just listen to tricks.
Scam Christians, Muslims scam Muslims. And it seems like the world is divided into the scammers and the gullible.
Yeah.
And one of the most interesting and one of the longest chapters is about a group that has a collective name, the Banu Sasan.
Yeah.
And that sounds like an umbrella term for beggars and all sorts of con artists.
Yeah. And so this kind of group has kind of a long history, right? Like they seem to like, by the 8th century, like there's kind of stuff talking about them, as this, collection of criminals, right?
It's the Muslim underworld.
And they're kind of treated as this, not reviled in a sense, but as, the kind of, how we might talk about the mafia or the circus or something like that, right? It's not totally, terrible. And they have their own voices too, right? Like, so I'm going to read you a bit of a 10th century poem. I can only read, the only section I could read is the one that's like PG.
Okay.
So, like, so it is, and they talk, one poem talking about him and his fellows. So we wander the world, seek nothing but glory, and our separateness is our distinction. We've been tossed around and turned inside out and shaped like desert sands in the wind. But we savor our days both in lean times and luxury. We're drunk nonstop and always inflamed. We taste the sweetness of life in sex and in Seuss.
Whoa. So he gives us a list of the things that this group includes. They include beggars, all sorts of con artists, every sorts, illusionists, which we would call magicians, illusionists, pseudo dervishes, fake blind men, handlers of wild animals, and on the top of it, at the very highest rank of it, are fire and brimstone preachers. As al-Jabari describes the Banu Sasan, they remind me of the confraternity of beggars in Victor Hugo's well-researched novel, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. From the Middle Ages until they were cleared in the 18th century, the slum districts of Paris were colloquially known as the Court of Miracles because that is where quote-unquote blind beggars regained their sight and quote-unquote lame beggars regained the use of their legs. Hugo picked up on a common pre-modern literary conceit about these beggars, that they were an organized criminal counter-society with its own leadership. There's really no hard evidence for such a confraternity of beggars as described by Victor Hugo, but the deceits of able-bodied beggars describing themselves as the blind and crippled are a common complaint in the sermons of 13th and 14th century French preachers and moralists. I'm not sure how seriously we should take him about this, but al-Jabari makes the Banu Sasan sound very much like an organized criminal network.
I came across this set of poems by a guy named Muhammad ibn Daniel. He dies around 1311. He dies in Cairo, but he has a little bit of an interesting story. He grows up in Aleppo, and then as a teenager, that's when the Mongols come in and conquer the city. And he's one of many people that are like refugees. And he makes his way down to Cairo, where he's an eye surgeon for a bit, but he finds his groove as a playwright and a poet, and he gets to like the Mamluk court, falls in love with him for a period of time. So we have three plays that survive from him, and one of them is called The Amazing Preacher and the Stranger.
Yeah,
and most of it is this. Hey, here's this parade of people from the Banu Sasan that come in, and he kind of names them off as they come in and describes a bit about what they do. So, here's the actual names that they give him. I want you to kind of guess what they might be doing. So, first one is Perfumer's Little Broom.
What? Perfumers?
Yep. Little Broom.
No idea.
He makes hashish.
Oh.
Reckless, who wields razors.
Sword swallower.
He's the eye surgeon.
Oh, an eye surgeon. Okay. Why is it? Wondered about that. Why are the eye surgeons listed among these tricksters and stuff? Because he has a section on that.
Yeah. Oh, this eye surgery was a thing. Like that was one of the things that they could do pretty well. Like you could get rid of a cataract in 13th century Egypt. So, how about New Moon?
New Moon?
Yeah.
No.
The astrologer.
Ah.
Father of the Beast.
Animal trainers.
That's right. Chopped meat.
Chopped meat. Those who sold groceries.
The surgeon.
Chopped meat is surgeon?
Yeah, he's a surgeon who is able to do self-inflicted wounds.
Oh, yeah.
And he who goes astray.
He who goes astray. No.
The camel driver.
Who takes you for a ride.
Who takes you for a ride, yeah. So there's a bunch of them, I didn't get the others, but, another one that I found really interesting was the tattoo woman. And so she actually does services of tattooing as well as circumcising girls.
As well, circumcising girls, of course. Of course.
But this is one of the biggest evidence of tattooing as happening in the medieval.
Yeah, but I thought that was not permitted.
Well, I can tell you that maybe that's why she's part of the Banu Sasan.
That's why she's probably, yeah.
Yeah. You know what else I liked was there's a lot of parts about tomb robbing, right?
Yeah.
My India is like Indiana Jones has kind of come out here because there are all sorts of little traps. And I'm just kind of imagining them going into a pyramid, and these kind of traps. Like he's literally telling us one about idols, so I guess statues, that have swords in their hands,
Yes.
as you walk by them, they start stabbing away, coming at you. And he says, all right, this is how you have to figure out how to get that. And so he's got that trap, the sand that pours on you, or the one that fills up with water, the room that fills up with water.
And these are traps that are devised by the tricksters who are claiming to know where these treasures are. They've set up these traps in advance. They warn the mark about the traps, and then the traps prove to the mark that the trickster really knows where the treasure is and that there really is a treasure. And he even has iron and brass objects that are thinly coated with gold so that you can appear to have a gold hoard. It's a lot of work that goes into to these tricks and to these scams, and a lot of preparation that goes into it. But I guess the payoff is worth it.
There are also the ones that are like more direct crimes, like breaking and entering.
Yes.
So we have there's ones where like you get like a young girl and she pretends she's lost, and it's a way of trying to figure out if people are inside, right? Like,
right.
But the best one is the one involving a turtle.
Yeah, go ahead, tell about that.
Yeah, the man will have with him will have a flint with him, which he strikes. He will also have a candle the size of a little finger, which he lights and sticks to the turtle's back. Then he makes a hole through the roof of a building that he wants to break into. He sends the turtle through the hole, and the turtle takes a turn around the whole house while the man observes what's there and finds out where to go. All this while, he's still on the outside of the hole. If anyone becomes aware of his presence, he withdraws and leaves. If not, he will have become familiar with the whole house and its contents and what route he should take, and everything about it will be familiar with it. When the candle goes out, he enters through the hole, goes where he wants, takes what he wants, and comes out unharmed. Wise up to these things.
Yeah, I asked myself, is he really warning people about this, or is this a how-to book?
Yes, I know it is.
It reads like an instruction manual.
And it's unbelievable in a sense, but it can it be done? But yeah, it could be I could see you putting a little, you have a little turtle. It can walk around. It won't walk around pretty fast, but it'll, wander around. Have a little candle. You can see what's happening. The idea, I guess, is mostly to make sure that nobody's home, but it seems ingenious.
I was trying to think of anything in the medieval West that's analogous to this, and I couldn't think of anything that's you have stories told about bad people, about criminals, something like this, a manual about swindlers. You don't have it.
Yeah, like the only thing I ever came across is from early 17th century China. It's called the Book of Swindles, which is very similar. So, and it's also an English translation. So if you can find it out. Yeah. Again, just, here's our cons and tricks and stuff like that. But yeah, nothing in the West. And even in the Arabic world, I've never come across anything like this. Although there's lots of literature about, people that do cons, right? One of the famous books, Impostures, that's the 12th century. That guy's doing all sorts of kind of cons, right? I also found there's a lot of kind of interest in kind of the kind of people out in the desert that commit crimes, right? Kind of Bedouin type or pre-Islamic figures that were bandits of highway bandits, right?
Yeah.
There's here's a work that was done 700 years later about these guys, so I think there's a long interest in that kind of true crime, right?
Yeah. And what you also have is a lot of traveling.
Yeah.
Al-Jabari himself is a great traveler, but travel is common in the Islamic medieval world. And much of the swindlers, the tricksters, the con men that you con artists that you encounter in this are people who are on the roads, because it's on the roads that you encounter strangers. And it's in between the cities that you don't have law.
Yeah. Yeah, like there's just no one there, right? Like
Yeah,
you can do that, like whereas different, like in England, like it's like little village after little village and manor. It's hard to find a place where you could be all alone, right? Like it's Nottingham Forest seems to be like the only spot. So it fascinates me that you can have this kind of subculture that kind of exists that everyone kind of knows about, but like it's somewhat shady, but people make their living, right? And we never, as historians, think about that, right?
yeah.
But something like this kind of reveals that they exist just as much. People that live outside the law, right? And they never get covered.
In a way, what he's writing about sounds like the way that gypsies, the Romani, were perceived in the medieval West.
Yeah.
That they are the ruthless peddlers who will swindle you, who will steal children. And you have a section here about stealing children and dyeing their skin black so that they pass as Nubians or Abyssinians, and then selling them as slaves.
Yeah.
I didn't see anything about gypsies, Romani in this, but I'm wondering whether they were also part of this Islamic Middle East. I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I should know, but I don't.
Like European, like medieval, like when I look at medieval records from Europe, they're often like, if they're dealing with crime, they're from the government, right?
Yeah.
I like got into this, I think, by looking at London's coroner's rolls, right? Which is like, here, a murder happened, someone was killed, and here's the government official, and they get a little jury together, and here's their little report. That's what the coroner's rolls are, right? So you get like the official word, right? And you never hear what the accused thinks, you rarely get that.
Yeah.
But and then you have that different. This is a different view of looking at crime, right? This is this is a view from the criminal side, more or less. It's just impressive, how much more that that they were part of society. Like this kind of just they're there, and because you don't hear the goody two shoes people of the medieval Arabic world. They don't mention them too much, but
they don't.
They're there.
The book is also valuable for what it tells us about prejudices, about assumptions, about the culture of the 13th century Islamic East. And it's things that are just simply that he writes about in passing. The misogyny when it comes to women is one of those things, but it also, in that section about dyeing people's skin colors, he writes this: to dye a client to look so like an Abyssinian Negro or Nubian that his wife, his father, and his mother will all refuse to have anything to do with him. And then he gives the recipe for making that dye. What's implicit in that is prejudice based upon skin color.
Yeah.
Which is something I really wasn't thinking about in terms of this society. But it's just written as in passing, as without comment, without any other.
Yeah. Like it's taken for the fact, you get the sense here, no, you can't trust people. Like this is the guy, for all his learnedness, he just sees the world through what he sees, right?
Yes.
You never have him think about the victim, or like other people here, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, he can be casually racist or casually misogynistic, and
he doesn't see himself as racist. It's just simply that's how people are.
Yeah,
that's how people are.
I can imagine this is what United States was 50, 60 years ago.
Yes.
Hopefully not the world.
Yeah, the casual racism that is taken as just for granted.
Yeah. and just like towards other religions.
Yeah.
So most people believe that. Hey, we got to get rid of these Christians. There's a bunch of con men. Especially the monks and the priests. They're
Yeah, the
just
monks are really bad. Yeah. Yeah.
they're and you can kind of see like 14th century Egypt. There's a lot more like anti-Christian prejudice, right? And it's like those damn monks.
But I kept on thinking also that not only are those monks and the Christians who perform fake miracles fooling Christians in the Middle East, that must have also been fooling a bunch of the Crusaders who came.
Oh,
And after all, fake relics become a cottage industry.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's a part where he describes like the statue weeping, the statue of Jesus weeping. Like, well, in the head you put like mercury and you heat it up at a certain. If you heat it up to a point, it will start like the water inside will start evaporating and it'll come out through the eyes.
And so much of this just strikes me as being things that go through the ages.
So one of the questions the kind of question I kind of brought in here is, can we actually believe what he's writing? And it came to me because I gave this paper at the Kalamazoo about this chapter on military matters. It's a very short chapter. It's maybe 6-7 sections long.
Yeah.
Where he describes a couple of instruments, including this trebuchet he talks about this trebuchet that was used against the Crusaders during the Fifth Crusade. So, and from Crusader accounts, we have like, hey, there's this trebuchet that kept on attacking us, and it was basically it could turn. It was on a platform that it could turn around and things like that. So he describes that. But what I really found interesting was there was a couple of prescriptions for like swords, right? Like how do you make this stuff and the sword will become sharper, right? It'll cut through. You boil all these ingredients up, and it'll kind of put it in, and you put your sword in for like a half a day, and it comes out and you'll be able to cut through anything. Could this actually be real, right? Like, could this be done? Because I even asked like on the Wikipedia chemistry like board, can this can this do stuff, And like most, I think people in the audience were of kind of like, it's just you just make believe like that you can't make a sword cut faster, right? But I don't know, like in a sense, like all this stuff that like Jabari is either this super genius for knowing these, or he's just kind of making up a lot of stuff, and like it's just pulling the wool over. Like, is this the con man's game where he's conning us, the reader?
It's hard to say. It really is hard to say because we can't get all the ingredients. It's a book that cries out for mythbusters.
Yeah.
And I guess you have to remember that he's writing this for a specific reason. He's been given a commission to write the book, and he's writing it for the entertainment of a particular Turkman ruler. There are times that I think he protests too much, that he claims to have the type of knowledge, and the fact that he begins the book with his list of all the works he's consulted, rather than making me think that, he really knows this stuff, it makes me think he's trying to make me believe he knows all this stuff. He wants to impress me with his knowledge. But there's no way that we are going to determine this. So I think we need to read this with some healthy skepticism, and we ought to be wise about him as well as about what he writes about. So I think that's about all we could say.
Yeah, and enjoy this book.
And enjoy the book. I really thank you again for coming on to the show and for talking about this work. And I really thank you for introducing it to me. Like I said, I knew nothing about this, and it's always great to learn something new.
Yeah. It's I'm blown away about all the materials that are coming out that people are working on. The medieval globe, if you're a medievalist, don't center yourself on like one little part of the medieval globe. There's so much out there.
I guess that's all for today's show. Peter, thank you again for introducing me to this fascinating window onto the criminal underbelly of the medieval Islamic world.
Thanks so much. I love talking about this.
As a reminder, Humphrey Davy's translation of the Book of Charlatans is available from New York University Press, and as Peter said, it's a fun read, even if you aren't a medieval nerd like myself. Until next time, bye for now.